I think PyroMania has an interesting concept, as it breaks the traditional conventions. The story takes a group of people who are seemingly socially inadequate and puts them in a situation and habitat that is both dangerous and unusual. The typical loner would keep themselves to themselves and keep their heads down, but these people experiment and ultimately get killed in the process of learning from their mistakes. In doing this, it challenges the current real media, as the film isn't pretty either aesthetically or through the story. It's potentially real, and it doesn't hide anything, and as I said, it breaks the conventions. In creating and filming PyroMania, we have created something that will be attractive, lucrative even to a younger audience. I think it will be particularly appealing to those around 20 years old, maybe a little older, and I think predominantly men will like to see it, but I can see women being intrigued as well. I think it's a story that people will want to see, as well as need to see. I think it holds a moral which people need to understand, because essentially for these people, fire is a drug, and so it's essentially warning people of the dangers of drug use, even if it is a seriously warped way of looking at it. I learnt a great deal about how much of an impact the different camera angles can have in telling a story. I think if you shot the film from a higher angle and didn't have the secrecy of Charlie's identity at the beginning, it would tell a totally different story, and those characters would hold a completely different purpose and status in the story. Angles can have so much of an impact on the story, and as for the post-production of the piece, I've done stuff like this many times before, so it was kind of old hat by now, but really getting out there and filming something with a story and a purpose was really inspiring for me. It's been a serious development from the preliminary task to this. Shooting the preliminary task was really an experiment for me of how the technical aspects go together, and how much what it really is that goes on behind the camera that contributes just as much as what it is that goes on in front of the camera that goes together to make a fantastic film. I discovered that a lot of thought goes into making an aesthetically pleasing picture, and you often have to make compromises, particularly in low-budget film. I think if we were going to sell PyroMania to a film studio for serious production, I would like it to go somewhere like Dark Castle Entertainment, as they have a history of doing films with themes similar to that of PyroMania, such as Whiteout and The Factory. Alternatively, it may be sold to Warner Brothers directly, as Dark Castle are loosely affiliated with Warner Brothers, as the company owns the right to the Twilight Zone. If the film were to go to more British routes, I would try and approach working title films, Film 4 Productions, or BBC Films with the rights. I would be unsure whether to approach Warp Films with PyroMania, as I'm not sure it was something they'd be specifically interested in directly. However, if Warp X were interested, I'd probably want to condense it down into a short film. PyroMania was intended to do what the Twilight Zone was originally designed to do: break people's conventional perceptions of normality. In the story's development, it suggests that maybe the police aren't always right, and that people with some form of obsession aren't always the outcasts. The look of the film will be very arty, and the picture will be designed not to look clear-cut in reflection of the characters and the story itself. Unlike in many traditional films, PyroMania would have lots of symbolism, as I feel films often take their audiences for idiots, and with PyroMania you have to look beyond what you just see, and infer a lot from it as well. During the production of PyroMania, I have learned little about the technologies used, although this is mostly due to my previous experience in filmmaking. I have learnt how to use manual technologies such as a dolly for the chase scene. In the preliminary task, however, I briefly learnt how to use another form of film editing software. For this we used Adobe Premiere Effects, which was an interesting experience to say the least. To me it seemed quite limited in its capabilities for the film project, and I would be sceptical about using it again, which is the main reason why I avoided using the software for the final project. Throughout the filming process, the overall look of the piece had to be taken into consideration, and this was the main learning experience for me. In conjunction with what I have learned in drama, symbolism has recently become very important to me. This came in the form of representing the fire in the film without it actually being there, and continuing this theme through the film. In the opening sequence we have the matches and the candle being struck, which we then see dissolving into a raging fire, but I mean the small symbols that remind us of who these people are in the film are. In the bathroom scene, for example, the towel Charlie uses to dry himself is deliberately orange to represent the fire. When he is running, he is dressed in a yellow t-shirt, which again represents this. However, when he goes into the bathroom and changes, he is dressed entirely in black, which shows that the fire has burnt out now. The black costume here represents the charcoal and ash that has been left behind as a result of the fire. As we can see, this theme is also represented in Laura. To create an appropriate mood for the film, the angles, cuts and sounds also had to be taken into consideration. In the film's opening we do not see Charlie's face for the first couple of shots, which attempts to create tension by hiding the identity of the walker. When we do see his face, it is a brief glance before we go into a series of rapid cuts to create a walking feel and again create tension. I felt it was important to have a close-up of the match being struck, as this shows that this is an important event, and this is traditionally done to show this in films, even if it looks slightly out of place. You'll often see it when a future couple touch hands for the first time in films or soap operas. The first time we see Charlie properly, the shot is of his feet and looking up to him, which suggests that his character holds dominance in the progression of the story. During post-production, we also had to darken a lot of the footage to allow for continuity errors. Due to time restrictions, we had to film earlier in the evening than we would have liked. The film wouldn't have worked if it was shot in the day, as you get an entirely different mood state from the different lighting levels. And filming at night creates a much more eerie setting than the daytime light levels, and this state works much better with the theme of the film, to create an appropriate build-up for the piece. Shot lengths are also overall very short. I think this works well in creating the appropriate atmosphere, and it's fascinating how much is achieved after the principal photography has taken place. If you look at the raw footage, the effect is not nearly the same as the final product. Deciding to create PyroMania was a somewhat lengthy process, which involved a lot of research and public questioning. We have come to the point in film now where you have to be very careful that you aren't recreating or simply reinventing a story that's already been told. It turns out that people feel that there aren't enough psychological thrillers available at the moment, and those with the theme of obsession and addiction are increasingly few and far between. This is fantastic news for us, as it provided an opportunity to go forward with the initial project idea. It just so happened that the idea was sparked by watching the film adaptation of The Phantom of the Opera, which is also making a comeback. I was really excited that all our ideas seemed to be going in the right direction, and only needed a few minor tweaks to be suitable for production. Admittedly, there could be things done better with the final project, but working with a limited cast and crew is always going to provide issues in the effectiveness for us, and if I were to take the project further, I would certainly work my utmost to correct these slight issues. In my opinion, PyroMania would be something different, and take a more James Bond approach to British cinema. We are renowned in the UK for making films about the things we know, period drama, stories about our national identity, and there are very few stories about the deeper, darker things in life. I think this as England began to move towards the world I have in mind, but it was still very believable. My idea is to tell the tale of something that isn't believable, but does happen. I want to make a film that takes the context of fantasy and turns into a real story with a twist that casts doubt about the society we live in, rather than a twist that makes a believable story completely ridiculous. My aim in film is to create something that makes the audience think and question what they've seen, asking, is that possible? But the answer is always yes.